اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم والعن أعداءهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا خيرة الله وابن خيرته، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله، لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت وعظمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام، وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت، ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها، ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياعهم وأتباعهم وأولياعهم. يا أبا عبد الله، إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان، ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبة، ولعن الله ابن مرجانة، ولعن الله عمر بن سعد، ولعن الله شمرا، ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتنقبت لقتالك بأبي أنت وأمي. لقد عظم مصابي بك، فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله، إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونصب لك الحرب، وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم. وأبرأوا إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانا وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشياعكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم، وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم. والناصبين لكم الحرب، وبالبراءة من أشياعهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم، وحرب لمن حاربكم، وولي لمن والاكم، وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم، ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم، أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة. وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله، وأن يرزقني طلب ثاره مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبتي، مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعل لي في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية، وابن آكلة الأكباد اللعين ابن اللعين، على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله، في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم العن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك اللعنة أبد الآبدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعن منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم، وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم العن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد، وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم العن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم العنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا أجعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني، وابدأ به أولا، ثم العن الثانية والثالثة والرابع. اللهم العن يزيد خامسا، والعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد وشمرا وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم، الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات. Brothers, before we continue, inshallah, can I please request that everyone stand up and take a few steps forward, as we're still expecting a few more brothers. For Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat. There's also a lot of space on the side here if you guys want to come in here, inshallah.
صلوات. ایک اور درود بھیج دیجیے محمد وآل محمد پر. یہ غربت علی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے. حق مانگنے جو زہرا، حق مانگنے جو زہرا دربار میں گئی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے. آواز آ رہی ہے، میں بنت مصطفیٰ ہوں، بابا کے کلمہ گویوں، میں ہی تو فاطمہ ہوں. ارے پہچاننے سے دنیا، پہچاننے سے دنیا انکار کر رہی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے. مسجد میں سر جھکائے مولا کھڑے ہوئے ہیں، حاکم کی تہمتوں کو چپ چاپ سن رہے ہیں، ارے صدیقہ سب کے آگے جھٹلائی جا رہی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے۔ کہتی ہے رو کے زہرا، جانے نہ دوں گی تنہا، پٹکے میں مرتضیٰ کے ہے ہاتھ سیدہ کا، اب ہے کسی کا درا، اب ہے کسی کا درا، اور دکھ ترے نبی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے۔ ایک کوچے میں پہنچ کر دیکھا ہے مجتبی نے، ظالم نے ضرب ماری، کیسے خدا ہی جانے، ارے بنت نبی زمین پر، بنت نبی زمین پر، غش کھا کے گر پڑی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے۔ پہلو بھی ہے شکستہ، ہاتھوں پہ بھی ہے چھالے، ہے آپ کی امانت اب آپ کے حوالے، یہ کہہ کے مرتضیٰ نے میت نبی کو دی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے۔ حق مانگنے جو زہرا، حق مانگنے جو زہرا دربار میں گئی ہے، یہ غربت علی ہے۔ اور محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
Brothers, can I please request that everyone again please take 2 steps forward as we still are expecting some brothers. Brother Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Let us all welcome the esteemed Shaykh Mohamed Abbas Panju with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج.
ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل
روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم وعلى غاصبي حقوقهم وعلى منكري فضائلهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. آمين رب العالمين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة، يا غريب الغرباء، يا مظلوم كربلاء، السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته، السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته، السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي، يا سادتي، فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما محمد إلا الرسول قد مضت من قبله الرسل أفإن مات أو قتل انقلبتم على أعقابكم. صدق الله العلي العظيم وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج.
Ashura is a commemoration which is aqaidi. The root of the tragedy of Ashura is deeply rooted within usuluddin, such that if there is any shortcoming in our understanding of Ashura, it means there is a shortcoming in our understanding of usuluddin. If there's any shortcoming in our commemoration of Ashura, there's a shortcoming in our usuluddin. A person who doesn't stand Ashura did not understand usuluddin in its entirety. And when we understand Ashura, or we begin to understand Ashura, the tragedy of Ashura cannot be understood in isolation. The roots of Ashura begin from the day of Saqifa and the Shahada of Rasulullah. And you find this clearly outlined in the Hadith al-Qudsi, which is known as Ziyarat Ashura. Ziyarat Ashura in essence is wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was then made public to us by the Ma'soom Imam. And this reality is outlined inside of Ziyarat Ashura when you say, Allahumma al'an awwala zalimin zalama haqqa Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa akhira tabi'in lahu ala dhalik. La'na of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon the first ones to have oppressed you. Allahumma lan awwala zalimin zalama haqqa Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So first point of contemplation is that this ziyarah is a ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein. And as you all know, the ziyarah is a pledge of allegiance. Ziyarah is a bay'ah. If you look into Ziyarat Ashura in its entirety, it is about bay'ah. Ziyarat Ashura encompasses the entire ethos of Ghadir. Because Ghadir was about what? Loyalty to a godly appointed Imam and disassociation from anyone who is an enemy to that Ma'soom Imam, to that divinely appointed Imam. This is the entire message of Eid al-Ghadir. And you find this message of Ghadir captured within Ziyarat Ashura, with the addition of the outlining of the madhlumiyat of Imam al-Hussein. Hence Ziyarat Ashura is bay'ah. When you send Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. This salam means what? Salam means my loyalty towards you. You read through this entire Ziyarat Ashura, there are two things, tawalli and tabarri. Loyalty towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. Not only am I with you, but my loyalty in that I am not with your enemies either. I do not have any interest that is mushtaraka. Not that my partial interest is with Imam al-Hussein and my partial interest is with Bani Umayyah. Ziyarat Ashura teaches us from the most simplest of lessons, which is one of the biggest lessons, to be courageous enough to take a stance in life. You look at a lot of the fitna, look at a lot of the fasad that happens at a communal level. You look at a lot of the misguidance that happens at a communal level. Misguidance is only prevalent when good men decide to sit on the fence. They decide not to take a stance. Ziyarat Ashura teaches us to be men of backbone. Because this is what the Pledge of Allegiance means, to take a stance in life against misguidance, against corruption of the deen. For Ziyarat Ashura, this Pledge of Allegiance teaches us that Ashura cannot be understood in isolation. To truly understand the depth of the tragedy that took place on the day of Ashura, you have to go back to the roots. Hence, the ziyarah tells us, Allahumma lan awwala zalimin zalama haqqa Muhammad wa ala Muhammad So I have to ask myself, who is this أول من ظلم حق محمد وآل Muhammad? And if you understand who was the first people to oppress Ali Muhammad, you begin to understand that again through Ziyarat Ashura, that Bani Umayyah, the only thing Bani Umayyah did is that they built upon a foundation that was already laid for them. Allahumma lan awwala dhalimin dhalama haqqa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Send la'na on the first people to do dhulm and to oppress Ali Muhammad. And look at the words of Ziyarat Ashura, they are so daqiq, they are so precise. Allahumma lan awwala dhalimin dhalama haqqa Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa akhira tabi'in lahu ala dhalik. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say wa akhira tabi'in lahu ala dhalik? Tabi', the word is those who followed in their footsteps, meaning that when Bani Umayyah came and martyred and killed Imam al-Hussein, oppressed Imam al-Hussein, butchered Imam al-Hussein and his family, this was only a byproduct of a greater dhulm that was done before Ashura. To send la'na on Bani Umayyah and to not acknowledge what happened in Saqifa out of husnul dhan, this is a defect in Iman. And when you look at it in reality, it is nothing but hypocrisy. Because sending la'na and condemning Bani Umayyah and standing with Imam al-Hussein requires tabarri from the people of Saqifa. To try and reconcile and say no, that I will have loyalty or I will show my affection or turn a blind eye to what happened to the family of Rasulullah after the martyrdom of the Holy Prophet, and then still have the audacity to stand with Imam al-Hussein, is hypocrisy in its highest form. This is a reality that is taught to us in Ziyarat Ashura, a reality which is aqaidi. If we understand this, we'll come back to the issue of the martyrdom of Rasulullah. Tara, in most of the world of the mukhalifin, the famously narrated version is that Rasulullah died a natural death. And for many reasons, a small reason of which is taqiyya historically. A small reason, historical taqiyya. You find that this narrative is also the most famously narrated version of history, even amongst the Khassa, even amongst the Shia, that Rasulullah died a natural death. And this is the first point of dhulm that is performed on Rasulullah to hide the reality. If you are to refer back to the Holy Quran, Surah Ali Imran, verse 144, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this verse of the Holy Quran that was revealed after the Battle of Uhud, this is when the companions abandoned Rasulullah. They abandoned Rasulullah. The number of Sahaba fled from the battlefield. You find that this verse was revealed. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وَسَلَّمَ اللَّهُمَّ صَلِّ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ, and that Muhammad is nothing or not but a messenger from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قَدْ مَضَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ, and before him there are many prophets that have lived and that have left this dunya. أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم. The Quran points out to two realities over here. Look at the translation of the Quran, or look at the words of the Quran. If Rasulullah was to die, afa in mata, if Rasulullah was to die, aw qutil. If you look at the majority of the translations of the Quran, you will find that the translation says, if the Prophet was to die or he was to be killed. In kalabtum ala aqabikum. Start with the end of the verse, or the first half, the end of the part of the verse that we are quoting. In kalabtum. The Quran shows that there is going to be an inqilab, yani a revolution or a coup, where people are going to turn back on the teachings of Rasulullah. So the Quran over here clearly outlines that in the event that if the Prophet dies or the Prophet is killed, there is going to be a coup that takes place from amongst the Muslims and the Sahaba. This is number one. A coup in which they have turned back upon their heels. In kalabtum, turn back on your heels, meaning you abandon everything that Rasulullah taught and everything that the Muslim Brotherhood stands for, you will turn back on that. The word that is used in Arabic is absolutely heavy, meaning that this power that comes, or this party that comes into power through a coup, through an inqilab, have turned back on the religion of Rasulullah in its entirety. Saqifa represents nothing that Rasulullah came with. This is understanding the Quran. This is a reality. Look even through dictionaries and any book of grammar, Arabic grammar. Look at the meaning of the word inqilab, revolution, to overturn a previous system in its entirety. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that this party that will come into power in the event that the Prophet dies or is killed is going to come and overturn an entire system that was established by Rasulullah over 23 years. Islam of Saqifa is not the Islam of Rasulullah. The greatest tragedy is that when statements like these are made, they are considered as statements that are sectarian. Where in reality, if this is the case, then the first blame is to be pointed towards the Quran, that the Quran is promoting sectarianism, because the Quran is telling you that this revolution or this coup that happens is overturning the deen of Rasulullah. Number two, afa in mata aw qutil, if the Prophet was to die or was to be killed. Our point over here for tafsir of the Quran, which is key to our Aqidah and our Usuluddin and to understanding Ashura, is from this word or this particle aw, alif waw, afa in mata aw qutil. The translation of this particle is or. If you open a majority of the English translations, whether it's on your app, whether these are physical copies of the Quran, entum go and try, you will see that the translation is or. If you were to translate the word aw as or, if the Prophet was to die or the Prophet was to be killed, this means that there is taraddud. This means that there is uncertainty. The Prophet's life is going to end. This is for sure. But we don't know. Maybe the Prophet will die. Maybe the Prophet will be killed. The word or in Arabic means that there is a possibility that two things could happen. Either he dies naturally, in mata, or maybe he's killed. But what we also know is that the Quran as a divine book of guidance is not a book that leaves mankind within the realm of uncertain probabilities. The Quran is a definite book of guidance and a definite book of haqq. The Quran is not a book of probabilities. for man to then roll the dice to see which way guidance is. It's a book of absolute truth. So when you come into the usage of the word aw within Arabic language, you will find that this particle alif waw, actually its original usage is translated as rather. Afa in mata aw qutil, yani the Quran, Allah is telling you if the Prophet was to die, rather if he was to be killed. Meaning what? It means assertion. From a grammatical perspective, Allah is making clear a reality that this Prophet is not going to die, rather he is going to be killed. Where is the proof for this? There are words that are in Arabic, their meanings are mushtarak. Mushtarak means that a single word can have multiple meanings, and the correct intended meaning is understood, number one, through context, and number two, through usage. Like the word Mawla. Mawla has a number of meanings. What is at the top of my mind? There are at least 17 meanings of the word Mawla. If you go back to the word, if you go back to the Maqtal, for example, you look at the introduction of Joan, one of the Shuhada of Karbala. Joan, when you look at his introduction within the books of the Maqatil, it will say Joan Mawla Abu Dhar. Joan, the Mawla of Abu Dhar. Joan was the slave of Abu Dhar. He was actually trained and given tarbiyah by Abu Dhar. And you see, this is the participation of Abu Dhar in Karbala through the tarbiyah of Joan. Abu Dhar was one of those people who was given ilmul balaya wal manaya. And he knew what was going to happen to Imam al-Hussein. And it hurt Abu Dhar so much that he would not be alive on the day of Ashura to support Imam al-Hussein. So he said, I am going to nurture a servant and a slave through my tarbiyah will represent me on the day of Ashura. Joan, Mawla of Abu Dhar. Is he the master of Abu Dhar? No, he was a slave of Abu Dhar. So the word Mawla can mean master, at the same time it can mean slave, and at the same time it can mean friend. But the context and the usage of the word Mawla is what allows us to understand what the intended meaning is. Similarly, when it comes to the Quran and we want to understand the usage of the word aw, alif waw, which is falsely translated as or, the word aw has multiple meanings. It means rather, and it could also mean or. However, when I want to understand what is the intended meaning from a number of meanings that are allocated to this word aw, I need to go back to the Quran and I need to see how is the particle alif waw used in other verses of the Quran in order to deduce the intended meaning in Surah Al Imran verse 144. So if you come back to Surah Safat, you will find where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about Nabi Yunus. وَأَرْسَلْنَاهُ إِلَى مِئَةِ أَلْفٍ أَوْ يَزِيدُونَ. We sent him, yani Yunus, to a community or to a village of 100,000 people. أَوْ يَزِيدُونَ. The translation over here, when you go back to the Arabic books of tafsir, doesn't mean we sent him to 100,000 or more. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you we sent Nabi Yunus to 100,000 people or more, what does this show you? It means that there is uncertainty in the number. There were 100,000 or more people, more than 100,000. It could be more, it could be less. Rather, you come and you find that within the tafsir of the Quran, what is meant over here, mi'ata alfin aw yazidun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, we sent Nabi Yunus to a village of 100,000 people, rather more than 100,000 people. meaning that the impact of Nabi Yunus and how the adhab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was raised is the importance of tawbah and repentance that is done in congregation of greater than 100,000. So we understand there are other verses in the Holy Quran where the word alif waw aw is used to mean rather assertion. And hence when we come to this verse of Uhud in Surah Ali Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outlines for us a reality within the Quran that the Imam or that the Rasul was killed and is shaheed. And the same thing when it comes to the usage of grammar. If you go back to Tafsir al-Tibyan of Shaykh Tusi, Shaykh al-Ta'ifa, he authored a tafsir of the Quran known as Tafsir al-Tibyan. Tafsir al-Tibyan means what? Tafsir of the Holy Quran by breaking down the language in terms of the intended meaning of the Quran as per the usage of Arabic language. Unfortunately, tafsir of Shaykh al-Tusi, Tafsir al-Tibyan is not mainstream tafsir. I don't even know if there is a valid translation of the tafsir of Shaykh al-Tusi. Yet Shaykh al-Tusi is one of these central people through whom Tashayyu has continued in Ghaybat al-Kubra. Majority of our Maraja only become Maraja because they have studied the books of Shaykh al-Tusi. Till today, istimbat, the derivation of a hukum shar'i for the issues of halal and haram, happen through the books of Shaykh al-Tusi, Kitab al-Istibsar and Kitab al-Tahdhib. You find that a majority of the accreditations of people in Ilm al-Rijal, we depend on the Fahrast of Shaykh al-Tusi, the Kitab of Rijal of Shaykh al-Tusi. Yet when it came to tafsir of the Quran, Ahna, the Shia, are responsible for dhulm on Shaykh Tusi. We will go to the tafsir of Ibn Fulan and Ibn Fulan and Ibn Fulan. Where's the tafsir of Shaykh Tusi? Particularly for us non-Arabic speaking lovers of Ali Muhammad. We need to have a medium that allows us to understand the Arabic language and the usage of Arabic language. And is there anyone more credible than Shaykh Tusi to depend on when we want to understand the Quran and the aqaid from the Quran? Yet there is taksir from the wider Shia community when it comes to channeling and ensuring that the tafsir of Shaykh Tusi is available. This is one. So there is a reality that the Holy Prophet was killed. And the question comes that who killed Rasulullah? You come back to the hadith. Before we start speculating and before we try to understand how the Prophet's life ended, before me taking this belief or understanding this reality from fallible historians, first I need to go back to Ahlul Bayt. What does Imam al-Sadiq, what does Imam al-Baqir, what does Imam al-Mujtaba have to say about how the life of Rasulullah ended? Because when I take from Ahlul Bayt, I am taking from a divine source. What does Imam al-Sadiq have to say about this? What does Imam al-Mujtaba have to say? If you go back to the text, Al-Khara'ij wal-Jara'ih, and you go back to the text of Ibn Shahr Ashub in his Manaqib of Ali Abi Talib, you have hadith that is narrated by Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, where Imam al-Mujtaba states, Uqtal kama qutila jaddi Rasulullah, I will be killed in the same manner that my grandfather Rasulullah was killed. Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba died a natural death. Abadan la. Imam al-Mujtaba was poisoned. He says, and I'm being killed in the same way that my grandfather was killed. Just like the way Imam al-Mujtaba was poisoned, Rasulullah was poisoned. Imam al-Mujtaba says, I am killed in the same way that my grandfather was killed, in the manner that his wife, Imam al-Mujtaba's wife, Ju'da al-La'ina, poisoned him. The same way he says Rasulullah was killed, poisoned by his two wives, Aisha and Hafsa, as narrated by Imam al-Sadiq. Yet you find this person comes and says, maybe this hadith is da'if. Even if the hadith was to be da'if, look at the principle which is widely accepted within the Shia school of thought. Now leave aside the mukhalifin. Our idea is to make sure that the khasa and those who claim to be from the followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt understand that their Rasul was Shaheed. The problem is that even amongst the school of thought of the Shia Ithna Ashari, this narration and this narrative that Rasulullah was Shaheed is not acceptable. This is how far we have strayed, from the mainstream, from the original narratives and original teachings. Person comes forward and says, no, this hadith by Imam al-Mujtaba is da'if. Even if it is da'if. And this is where it becomes our responsibility to be able to understand these arguments, educate ourselves in these arguments, and be able to preach and guide our fellow brethren within the realm of wilayah. We have a widely accepted principle that is not only sahih in terms of its individual hadith, but is mashhur. Hadith is Sharif narrated within Kitab al-Kafi on authority of Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ajjal faraja. Madhmun al-Hadith, to paraphrase the hadith, it says, أعرض قلامنا على كتاب الله ما وافق الكتاب فقلناه وما وافق الكتاب or ما وافق الكتاب فليس منا or ليست منا. Ma'sum Imam says, match our hadith or compare our hadith to the Quran. Whatever from the hadith that matches the Quran or that is supported the Quran is from us, and whatever does not match from the Quran is not from us. Dirayat al-hadith, understanding a hadith is more important than the conveying and the narration of a hadith. In fact, Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam says, hadithan tadrih afdal min alf hadith tarwih. One hadith that you understand is better than 1,000 hadith that you just keep narrating. Why does Imam as-Sadiq Ma'sum Imam say, compare and match our hadith against the Quran? Whatever matches the Quran is from us, and whatever does not match the Quran is not from us. The first thing that we understand is that there are a number of people across the passage of time who will attribute hadith falsely to Ahlul Bayt that doesn't even emanate from Ahlul Bayt. This is number one. And the Rasulullah is no exception, because Rasulullah is the head of Ahlul Bayt. Number two, we have a manhaj in terms of vetting and accrediting hadith. Pay attention to this very closely. The argument is that, this hadith is da'if, that Rasulullah was poisoned. Hadith is da'if. When you say hadith is da'if, meaning what? The chain of narrators is not credible. Correct or no? Look at this hadith of Imam as-Sadiq. Match our words to the Quran, meaning match content for content. There is no talk over here by Imam as-Sadiq where he says, look at the chain of narrators. Imam as-Sadiq is telling you, more important than the chain of narrators is pay attention to the content, regardless of where it is emanating from. If the content matches the Quran, then accept it. Even if the hadith emanates from a da'if chain of narrators, if that content matches the content of the Quran, it becomes a hujjah. So when I have hadith from Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba that states that he is being poisoned in the same way that Rasulullah is being poisoned, meaning that Rasulullah is killed, and I want to authenticate the content of this hadith, I come back to the Quran. Is there a supporting verse from the Holy Quran that will give currency to this hadith of Imam al-Mujtaba, where it is attributed to him, where he says Rasulullah is going to be killed? Is there any verse of the Quran that supports this hypothesis or no? You come back again, this verse of the Holy Quran. Afa in mata aw qutil. The Quran is telling me over here, rather Rasulullah will be killed. And from this hadith of Imam al-Mujtaba, I understand that the content of the hadith matches this verse of the Holy Quran. In fact, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba's hadith became a tafsir of the Quran. Because the Quran tells you, indeed, the Prophet will be killed. Rather, he will be killed. Imam al-Mujtaba comes and gives you the tafsir of how he will be killed, by poison and by his wives. It is a great fallacy, and it is, from an aqaidi perspective, suicidal to discount realities of tariq based on a chain of narrators. This is aslan not tashayyu'. This is not the Shiaism. This is not a manhaj that was taught by Shaykh Mufid. This was not a manhaj that was taught by Shaykh al-Tusi. We have to be careful when we accept or reject hadith by just blaming it on a sanad. More importantly, you and I have a duty amongst the wider community when hadith are being rejected on the basis of a sanad, for you and I to step in and to correct the understanding of the people. What ma'rifah of Rasulullah do I have if my belief is that Rasulullah died a natural death? Man zara Husaynan arifan bihaqqih. The currency of ziyarah is when you have ma'rifah of Imam al-Hussein, including ma'rifah of the madhlumiyat of Imam al-Hussein. Hussein, and Rasulullah says what? Husseinu minni wa ana min al-Hussein. So same thing when it comes to the ziyarah of Rasulullah. With what face does a person do the ziyarah of Rasulullah in Medina, thinking that this prophet died a natural death? With what face I meet Rasulullah on the day of judgment, that I became one of those people who rejected his martyrdom. This is what it means when I say Rasulullah died a natural death. I'm rejecting the oppression of Rasulullah. I am siding with the enemies of Rasulullah. And if I reject the oppression of Rasulullah and the martyrdom of Rasulullah, it is as good as rejecting the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. Because Rasulullah said what? Husaynu minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Hussein is from me and I am from Hussein. What is applicable to Imam al-Hussein is applicable to Rasulullah. And what is applicable to Rasulullah is applicable to Imam al-Hussein. Except that which is reserved for Rasulullah. Khas, which is Nabuwah. These are the days of the madhlumiyat of Rasulullah and Ali Rasulullah. Number one, it becomes, I have heard this from a number of maraja in Najaf al-Ashraf. Generally speaking, it is wajib kifai to educate people on the madhlumiyah and the oppression of Rasulullah and the reality of how his life was ended. And depending on your role in society, that wujub, wajib kifai turns into wajib aini. Wajib aini, meaning that just as Salatul Fajr is wajib upon you, it is wajib upon you to do tabligh on the madlumiyat of Rasulullah. The closer we get to the ghaibah, the more that we have access to technology, the more the world becomes integrated, the greater our responsibility in tabligh to reclaim the narrative. And this is what has been taken away from us in regards to the oppression of Rasulullah. The narrative was taken away from us, such that 1400 years later, when you present this reality to the wider public, your own people reject. Something just came to my mind. I'll say this before we enter into Masaib. Yesterday I was sitting with one of the brothers, and one of the brothers, ChatGPT, is a big thing now. But you also understand that ChatGPT will only give you results based on what is generally fed into the internet. Correct or no? It's a collation of all the information that has been put from day one on the net, and from existing information, it either creates for you new information or streamlines for you this world of information that is there into something organized, summarized according to what you want. Sahih Lola. But this new information that comes from ChatGPT is dependent on an older set of information that has been constantly fed into the net. Sahih Lola. Yesterday, with one of the brothers, he done an exercise, and he put into ChatGPT, did Umar ibn Khattab flee away from any battlefield? Do you know what the answer came? This is where the real bala is. And this is where we got to understand the importance of reclaiming the narrative and an important role in the ghaibah of the Imam. She said, did Umar ibn Khattab run away from any battlefield? And if I paraphrase the answer that came back, the answer from ChatGPT comes back to that Umar ibn Khattab was known for his bravery. Sure. We're living in a world where business is changing based on the usage of ChatGPT. People are reshaping their lives based on information generated from ChatGPT. Do not think that religion is exempt from this, where there is going to come a time where the accepted truth is what comes out from ChatGPT. We do this for all other aspects of business. Today you can get a health plan using ChatGPT, which you will trust by closing your eyes. Sahilola, you can choose a fitness program based on what ChatGPT gives you, and you will trust it closing your eyes. You will make business decisions based on what ChatGPT gives you by closing your eyes. What makes you think that if not you, your generation, your nasal will not take deen from ChatGPT? And why is this an exemption and not everything else an exemption? It shows you towards the dangerous areas that we are floating into as you get closer and closer to the dhuhr of the Imam. And it is not sufficient for me to say, if my faith is protected, I don't care about anybody's faith. If you understand and you know the truth, number one, by way of amra bil ma'ruf and tawalli and tabarri, it becomes wajib upon you. Number two, as matamis who live with the right aqidah, you cannot live a life that is isolated. We may die having protected our faith. What about our children? And even if you die having protected your child's aqidah, our children interact with a wider community. Today it is in my best interest that everybody else around me, their children have the right aqidah. So where are our children going to marry into? I could do everything to protect my child's aqidah, But if I live in a community where everybody else are muqassirin, when it comes to azan, it comes to aqidah, who I give my son to? Who I give my daughter to? Who do I take for my son and who do I give my daughter? Living in isolation when it comes to usuluddin and i'tiqadat, this is something that we are questionable for. Standing up for the madlumiyat of Rasulullah is as important as standing up for the madlumiyat of Imam al-Hussein and Sayyid Siddiqat al-Tahira. These are the days of this dhulm. The foundation of the dhulm was built on these days. There is a narration by the Ma'soom Imam Sadiq Ruhi Lahul Fida, where he states, the night that Rasulullah was shaheed, from the time that he was shaheed to the time that he was buried, we have, according to some narrations, that Rasulullah was buried after 2 days, some narrations after 3 days. And if you refer back to Kitabul Jamal of Shaykh Mufid, you find that a majority of the companions did not even attend the burial of Rasulullah. Imam al-Sadiq narrates from the Ma'soom Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Siddiqat al-Tahira, Imam Hassan, al-Mujtaba, Imam al-Hussein, Sayyidah Zainab bin Kulthum. 6 from the Ahlul Bayt. He narrates the hadith. Siddiqat al-Tahira says, it was upon the martyrdom of Rasulullah that we felt a fear that we have never felt before. This hand of protection that was over us has left us. And Imam al-Sajjad says, this is upon the martyrdom of Rasulullah that this enmity towards Amir al-Mu'mineen that was embedded in the hearts of the people was unleashed. And the recipient of this hatred in its entirety was Siddiqat al-Tahira, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. If we want to understand this dhulm of Saqifa, the most hard-hearted men on one side, the most vicious men on one side, people who were lower than animals on one side, the peak of dhulm in its entirety on one hand, and on the other hand, you had the peak of tahara, you had the peak of hijab, you had that heart that was the most delicate of hearts, Siddiqat al-Tahira. And what separated these two parties was a door in the middle. When Amir al-Mu'mineen refused to give bay'ah, Kunfudh went back to Abu Bakr and he says to him, Ali ibn Abi Talib has refused to give you bay'ah because he doesn't acknowledge you as Amir al-Mu'mineen. So he said, go back and tell Ali ibn Abi Talib it is not Amir al-Mu'mineen but it is the Khalifa of Rasulullah. So for the third time when Kunfudh went back and he said that it is the Khalifa of Allah who is calling you for bay'ah, Siddiqat al-Tahira came behind the door. And she says to him, I shall complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this title that belongs to Ali ibn Abi Talib, you have usurped it for yourselves. So when Kunfudh heard this, he goes back to the masjid and he says, this is what Fatima has said. At this point, Umar ibn Khattab, who was sitting by the side of Abu Bakr, stood up and he said, Ma lana walin nisa. What do we have to do and what do the women of this ummah have to do within our affairs? Allah. He says, go and get the bay'ah. And if he refuses, we shall burn down the house on him. When they came with the firewood, in the history it is mentioned that there are 300 people who surrounded the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen. And from these 300 people, a number of them were from Bani Aslam. They came and they surrounded the house of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, and they put the firewood against the door. Umar ibn Khattab cries out and he says, "Oh Ali, come out and give the bay'ah, and if not, we shall burn down the house upon you and those who are in the house." The people from Bani Aslam said, "But Hassan and Hussein are in the house." Omar says, "Wa in." The same words that were uttered in Saqifa, the same words that were uttered in Sham Ghariban, where Omar ibn Sa'ad said, "Burn down the tents upon those who are inside." Which is why when the tents begin to burn, one of the ulama in the Hausa said that Zainab alayhi salam came out. When she looked at the burning tents around her, she looked up towards the heavens and she said, "Oh Mother Fatima, Allah." He says, why does Zainab remember Fatima on Sham Ghariban? Because Zainab was inside of the burning house in Saqifa. This is why the Maktal says when the house was burning and there are people who came in and they were attacking Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, Zainab at that time, 5 years old, held the hands of her brother Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. She held her hand and she says, "My brother Hassan, why are they burning our house? Why are they beating our mother Fatima?" I say, "Zainab, on the day of Saqifa, you had Imam Hassan to protect you. But Sham Ghariban, you have to become Hassan. You have to become Abbas. Rabab is behind you. Sakina is behind you." The narrations mention the La'in came, 300 people. At the very top of them, you had Umar ibn Khattab, you had Khalid bin Walid and Mughira and Kunfud. They were standing there. The Maktal mentions that Umar lit the door of Fatima on fire. Allahu Akbar. The black smoke from the burning door. Hadith is Sharif by Imam as-Sadiq. He mentions my grandmother Fatima was choking from the burning flames. Allahu Akbar. As she was choking behind the door, Umar ibn Khattab kicked the door. In the narration it mentions Kitab Sulaim. It is mentioned over here that Sulaim asked Salman al-Muhammadi, "Oh Salman, is it true that they pushed down the door on Fatima?" Salman says, "Oh Sulaim, not only did they push down the door, but there was a nail that was protruding from the door. Allah, the protruding nail, and the rib of Zainab and the rib of Fatima." The narration mentions when the nail pierced the lungs of Sayyidah Fatima got punctured. She got crushed between the door and the wall. At this point, Shias of Adam Muhammad, Sayyidah Fatima cried out. Do you know what she cried out? In her loudest voice, she cried out, "Ya Abata wa Muhammada! Oh my father, Rasulullah!" Do you know the pain in the voice of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra? There was so much pain in the voice. Umar himself says in his letter to Muawiyah, Umar himself says, "When I heard the pain in the cry of Fatima," he says, "I turned around I turned around. He says, but when I turned around, I remembered my hatred for Ali ibn Abi Talib and the manner in which فَكَيْفَ قَتَلَ سَنَادِيدِ الْعَرَبِ, and I remembered how he killed the brave warriors of Quraysh. This enmity took over me. He says, so I turned around and I kicked the door with all the strength I have. Zahra between the door and the wall, she cried out, Ya Fizza! Sannidini! Fizza, come and help me! Mohsin has become Shaykh! Allah, Allah! Sayyida Zahra covered in a pool of blood. Mohsin has become Shaheed. Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba says, forgive me Shias and forgive me Sadat. Over here, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba comes. He says, Umar entered the house. He kicked Fatima on the stomach. He says then, Khalid bin Walid came. He slapped my mother across the bed. मातम मोहसिन मातम फातिमा
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, पहलू भी शिकस्ता है तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है पहलू भी शिकस्ता है तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है पहलू भी शिकस्ता है तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है पहलू भी शिकस्ता है तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता क्या हाल ये उम्मत ने क्या हाल ये उम्मत ने ज़गरा का बनाया है पहलू भी शिकस्ता है तुर्बत भी शिकस्ता है पहलू भी शिकस्ता है क्या हाल ये उम्मत ने क्या हाल ये उम्मत ने
زغرا کا بنایا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ۔ خاتون کوئی غم سے یوں چور نہیں دیکھی، خاتون کوئی غم سے یوں چور نہیں دیکھی، ایسی کوئی دنیا میں مستور نہیں دیکھی، 18 برس میں ہی لگتی جو ضعیفہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ۔ دربار میں ظالم نے، دربار میں ظالم نے کی ایسی پذیرائی، دربار میں ظالم نے کی ایسی پذیرائی، کس طرح سے تو بی بی پھر لوٹ کے گھر آئی، بالوں کی سفیدی نے، بالوں کی سفیدی نے سب حال سنایا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ 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 ہے۔ تو روتی رہی گھر میں حیدر سے بھی چھپ چھپ کے، تو روتی رہی گھر میں حیدر سے بھی چھپ چھپ کے، عصمت کی طرح دکھ بھی پردے میں رہے تیرے، کچھ درد تیرے بی بی، کچھ درد تیرے بی بی، بس جانتی فضا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ 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 ہے۔ دربار میں ظالم نے کی ایسی پذیرائی، دربار میں ظالم نے کی ایسی پذیرائی، کس طرح سے تو بی بی پھر لوٹ کے گھر آئی، بالوں کی سفیدی نے، بالوں کی سفیدی نے سب حال سنایا ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے، تربت بھی شکستہ ہے، پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے،
غربت بھی شکستہ ہے.
لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، 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 لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے. ترس پانی کو جو کو سر کے پلانے والے، ترس پانی کو جو کو سر کے پلانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے. ہو گئی شام گنے شام کے بازاروں میں، ہو گئی شام گنے شام کے بازاروں میں، ایک بیمار کو لا کو گئے ستانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے 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 والے. زغرہ کہتی بخشوا دوں گی گنہ محشر میں، زغرہ کہتی بخشوا دوں گی گنہ محشر میں، جو میرے لال پہ آنسو گئے بگانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے 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 والے. پانی تک تو نے نہ مانگا میرے مظلوم حسین، پانی تک تو نے نہ مانگا میرے مظلوم حسین، تیغ و خنجر سے پیاس اپنی بجھانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے. ترس پانی کو جو کو سر کے پلانے والے، ترس پانی کو جو کو سر کے پلانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے
वाले
रोके कहती थी सकीना मेरे चाचा को कहाँ, रोके कहती थी सकीना मेरे चाचा को कहाँ, लौट कर आई नहीं पानी पिलाने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने वाले, लुट गए आले मोहम्मद के घराने। या हुसैन 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 या हुसैन। सर को कटा के दीन पे, सर को कटा के दीन पे, खुद करबला पे कर दिया तूने हुसैन। या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन, हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन, हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन, हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन। ओ खालिक तेरा ममनून गए, खालिक तेरा ममनून गए, है मुर्तजा और फातिमा के नूर है। या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन, मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात। तवज्जो ज़ियारत। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद। बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। अस्सलामु अलैका या रसूलल्लाह, अस्सलामु अलैका या अमीरल मुमिनीन व सय्यिदल वसिय्यीन, अस्सलामु अलैकी या फातिमा सय्यदते निसाइल आलमीन, अस्सलामु अलैका या हसन अलमुज्तबा, अस्सलामु अलैका या हुसैन शहीद करबला, وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر الأهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي أبو الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين وأختيك زينب وبنتك رقية جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الأسر والزمان سيدي، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن وكعبة الإيمان وإمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا
وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.